Oh, good evening, this is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening. And what I'd like to talk about this evening is a little article I found again in Hedge. What a brilliant little website that is, and I would highly recommend any of my viewers to go and check that out. And this is basically about the criminalization of journalism. And these are new laws that are being brought into place in Britain, and they would basically criminalise anything that is deemed to be a threat to the government. Okay, and we're talking even stuff that could be obtained through freedom of information. If this is reproduced by a journalist, this could be deemed a criminal act. Now, why is this important? You know, it might seem an awful long way away, in England there when I'm in Canada over here, but there is a group called the Five Eyes, and that is Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada and the UK, and they have an information sharing agreement. And so all of the spying, all of the surveilling of people, all of the advances in surveillance are all shared between these 5 countries. And it seems right now that in each of these countries there is a certain tentacle of the octopus is being enacted. In the UK here, these laws to restrict journalism and to criminalise whistleblowing. Anybody who is reporting on inappropriate behaviour by the government is going to be caught up in this. In America, there is the introduction of martial law over the rioting. In New Zealand, there is basically the unifying of the voice on the internet. The Prime Minister of New Zealand has said that the government's voice will be the only true voice. And at the same time, we have the suppression of freedom of speech by these internet giants with their own form of absolute draconian policing. It's just the assault that's taking place right now on humanity is actually staggering. And so this is why it's important, because as these things get enacted, you see, the UK is going to face the opposition it's going to face from the public there, or whatever opposition there is on that particular issue. The US is going to deal with opposition to martial law and how that is going to play out. And in New Zealand, they're going to find out how the public is going to react to the shutting down of the internet and the tuning out of all voices except for the government's voice. And depending on those reactions and the fine-tuning and how that goes over, I will almost guarantee you that each of those scenarios will be reenacted in all of these 5 different countries. Anyway, let's pop over to this article and we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap-up. Okie dokie, here we go. Hedge, new UK laws could criminalise journalism. And this is authored by Richard Norton. British journalists and their sources are facing an unprecedented assault on freedom of speech, including the prospect of criminal prosecution. Threats aimed at whistleblowers and journalists were evident before the CV crisis struck, but went largely unnoticed. The government's Queen's speech in December included plans for new espionage legislation. It stressed the need to combat hostile state activity and make the UK a harder environment for adversaries to operate in. An indirect reference to the poisoning in Salisbury of Russian double agent Sergei Skripal. But it also insisted that the Official Secrets Act drawn up in 1989 must be updated, and confirmed that the Law Commission, the body that reviews the law in England and Wales, had been commissioned by the government to do this. Yet proposals drawn up by the Law Commission to review the Official Secrets Act pose major dangers. Whistleblowers and journalists could be convicted for revealing information about defence, international relations or law enforcement, even if it was unlikely to cause harm. They would make it easier to secure convictions by weakening the existing tests for proving an offence. Neither would someone revealing danger to the public, abuse of power or serious misconduct be able to argue that they acted in the public interest. In addition, maximum prison sentences on conviction, currently 2 years under the Official Secrets Act, would be increased. Moreover, it would not be a defence to show that the information had already lawfully been made public, unless the information had also been widely disseminated. And how would that be determined? Maurice Frankel, director of the Campaign for Freedom of Information, has warned that the Law Commission's proposal could criminalise the release of a vast amount of additional information. Keira Knightley plays GCHQ whistleblower Catherine Gunn, who was charged with breaking the Official Secrets Act. The case against her was withdrawn when it reached the Old Bailey. Instead of applying, as now, to unauthorised disclosures likely to damage defence, international relations or law enforcement, he points out that it would be an offence to reveal information that the discloser should have realised was simply capable of causing such damage. A whistleblower revealing information or a journalist or blogger publishing it would commit an offence even if there was only the remotest possibility of harm, says Frankel. Douglas Hurd, the Home Secretary responsible for the 1989 Official Secrets Act, assured the public that the measure would not apply to information of a general nature that might conceivably be used in committing an offence, where the chain of circumstances is too long and too uncertain. And down the track there will come a point where there is somebody who reads this act who doesn't know this, who wasn't privy to information of a general nature. Well, what does that mean? I mean, you see, it will get lost in the past, and all of a sudden it will be all information that could be any risk of harm to the government. The Law Commission's proposal would scrap this crucial limitation, Frankel warns. Importantly, officials who released information knowing that there was no realistic chance of harm would still risk prosecution without any public interest defence. Furthermore, under the proposals, leaking information that anyone could obtain by making a Freedom of Information request could be an offence. More secrecy. The Queen's speech included 2 other little-noticed measures that would bolster official secrecy. The government's Environment Bill would prevent the proposed Office for Environmental Protection from disclosing information, including about suspected failures by public bodies and organisations to comply with the law. Under the Health Service Safety Investigations Bill, a new body would investigate patient safety accidents or incidents in the National Health Service, but the disclosure of information held by the new Health Service Safety Investigations Body, HSSIB, would be severely limited. The measure would remove existing rights of access to information under the FOI Act and the right of individuals to see their own personal data under data protection legislation. The scope of this prohibition is remarkable, says the Freedom of Information Campaign. It applies to any information held in connection with the HSSIB's function that is not already published, whether or not it relates to an identifiable individual, whether or not it relates to an identifiable investigation, and whether or not it is capable of deterring participants from speaking frankly to investigators, inhibiting investigators in reaching their conclusions, or causing any other adverse effect at all. The current crisis has exposed the government's instincts to run for cover behind a wall of official secrecy. It has revealed what Frankel calls an epidemic of secrecy, insisting that it is following scientific advice whilst withholding the advice. And we're seeing exactly the same thing take place here in Canada. It has only been leaks which have allowed the public to know the membership of the important SAGE group of scientific advisors addressing the outbreak and the report of a simulated outbreak exercise in the National Health Service in 2016. At the time of writing, just 28 of more than 100 expert papers on the crisis have been published. NHS staff revealing shortages in protective equipment have been threatened with disciplinary action by their managers, who are themselves more likely to be responsible for those shortages. Instead of regretting, explaining or justifying its decision to impose a quarantine on people returning to Britain after holidays or business trips, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and the head of the UK Border Force, Paul Lincoln, appeared at a recent joint press conference to revel in the prospect of being given new powers. But take back control, the cry of Brexiteers, led by Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's chief advisor, takes on a whole new meaning as the government relishes the prospect of imposing more and more restrictions on the disclosure of information. The official appeal to stay alert to protect people from the outbreak should now be adopted in the fight against increasingly oppressive official secrecy. And as I say, this is coming across the Atlantic. It's going to be shared between the Five Eyes, and I will guarantee you that all of those countries will come under this kind of legislation in the very near future if we do not speak up about it. Now, certainly what's going on in Canada, I would say, is an experiment into how long you can extend the lockdown. Because, you know, Canadians are very cooperative. It's one of the things that they're known for worldwide. We do tend to go along to get along, and that's why Canada, up until recently, was such a wonderful country to live in. And now it seems that everybody is absolutely scared of everybody else. There is such a sense of mistrust. Even when you're walking around, you know, people put their heads down. They've got this mask covering their face. They put their heads down. They turn to one side. They don't want to make eye contact. And you know, it reminded me of an experiment. I think it was Milgard did this experiment. Horrible. You couldn't do this kind of stuff these days. Anyway, basically what they did was they cut the muscles in a baby monkey's jaw so it couldn't smile. And I don't know how the monkey knew this, but it avoided looking at its mother because it couldn't smile at its mum, and she maybe it would be misinterpreted and the baby would get rejected. But you could see in this little clip, you know, the monkey's looking everywhere but at the mother's face, and I get the same sense that people do not want to speak openly. And they are, I don't know whether they're ashamed or frightened, I have no idea. But I have noticed, I went on a little hike the other day, and I walked, came across a couple of people when I was walking. Now, they weren't wearing masks, and we had a little chat as we passed each other. Now, we social distanced, there was nothing like that, but you know, they were more open and willing to converse. And it just makes you wonder, you know, what a psychological appendage wearing a mask is, and how antisocial it is, and how we recognize that. You know, I mean, this is not something that you know, we're looking for. It's something that's very intuitive, because, you know, I sense that because I am a friendly, I'm a people kind of person. I tend to want to look at people in the eye, and I want to you know, do face to face. And so when people look away from me and look down, it's a strange feeling. And anyway, it's just a little observation there of how wearing a mask has a psychological impact on who we are as a society. And as I say, it's looking like we're revving up now. You know, if we get to the end of June, there you go, that is half the summer is basically gone, July and August, and then we're getting back into those cooler, damp days. We go into the resurrection, and Canada just ordered 32 million syringes in anticipation of a vaccine. So there you go. What a strange and wonderful world we now seem to find ourselves. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below, and again, please let me thank all of you for joining me. Thank you for the donations. They have been warmly received. It is, you know, there's been a lump in my throat, actually, when I've gone to PayPal and seen some of those donations, some larger, some smaller, but it doesn't matter. It's all a sign that there are more people out there. I'm not just sitting in my office talking to myself. There are people out there who are in agreement and have some empathy. And it basically gives me heart and courage to move forward, to try and, you know, keep this a part of the conversation and not allow this to be shut down. Because if we allow this conversation to shut down, we will never discuss anything ever again in the future. You know, these are serious issues that are happening in the world today, and we need to discuss them. Okay, you have yourself a great evening, and we'll talk very, very shortly. See you now. Take care. Bye.